In this set of videos, I will discuss American political values. To begin with, I want you to think yourself about what constitutes American values. What sort of things come to mind when we think about American political values? Some examples that come up might be liberty, equality, freedom, individualism, self-government. These are the sort of values that we think of when we think of American political values. There may be many others that mean something to each of us individually outside of the ones that I just mentioned. Let's look at the Pledge of Allegiance. So we all know the Pledge of Allegiance. It states, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." I bolded here liberty and justice because these are the two values, the two most prominent values in the American political realm. Liberty and justice. These are two sort of contradictory terms that coexist as one thing together under the American political system. Also, we could state equality is a grand value for the United States, with liberty and justice for all, not for the few, not for only the privileged, but for everybody. Liberty and justice. So what is liberty? We hear liberty often when we talk about American politics. Last week, I asked you to listen to My Country 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of Liberty. So America is the land of liberty. We hear this word quite often, and I want to go over the specific definition of what liberty is. So look at this quote here. "A nation arose and freedom was born into the world." What this means essentially is that with the emergence of the United States as it is, the world got a glimpse of what freedom could look like in a nation. America became the model of a free society, a free government for the rest of the world. It created modern day democracy, and modern day democracy is the example that is the example of a fully functioning, legitimate government in the world today. We talked about the Revolutionary War and British colonialism because it's very important to understand why the United States exists the way it does and how this concept of liberty and freedom emerged out of this era of colonialism, and it was born in a very revolutionary way. So liberty, we also hear independence and freedom. They're essentially synonyms, though they are slightly different. It's important to know the exact definition of these terms, so I'll go through them here with you. The definition of liberty is the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. The definition of independence, it means to be free from outside control and not depending on another's authority. And the definition of freedom is the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. The concept of liberty, freedom, and independence, these are all very important to the American psyche, to the American political system. But along with liberty comes law and justice. Justice as what was stated in the Pledge of Allegiance. So I use the term law here because law is something that's crucial in American political values as well as liberty. And as I stated earlier, these are quite contradictory terms. To be free, as I just stated, to have liberty means to be free of outside control from anyone, and one is allowed to do what they want and live as they wish to live. So the definition of law is the system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. So if one's actions are being regulated by their country or community, one is not 100% free. One loses a bit of liberty. But in some way, these two concepts, these two ways of governing our society exist together. This quote here, "There's no freedom without the law." So let's pause and think for a minute here. What does that mean? What does that mean to you as an individual, that there is no freedom without the law? If law is something that restricts our freedom, how are we free then with the law? So let's look at these other quotes here. "Men shall be ruled by the law, not by the will of other men." So in a sense, the law keeps men, or humans, it keeps us free from the will of other people. So if we're all bound by the law, another person cannot impose their will onto us. They're bound by the law, we're bound by the law, and we all must live by the law. This next quote, "Those who shall not live by the law shall die by the law." The law is incredibly powerful in governing and regulating society, and those that don't abide by it cannot live in society as it is. There are two types of law. There's natural law and positive law. Positive law is law that is made by society or by people. It's made in the context of society as a way to regulate people's behaviors and actions. Natural laws, on the other hand, they are inherent to us as human beings. That means we are born with these laws governing us and granting us certain rights and privileges. So if one believes in a higher power, one would say that these laws are laws granted to you by a supreme being. If one doesn't believe in a higher power, this still means that we are born with these laws as human beings. So again, I'll emphasize that two of the primary values in American society are liberty and law, or we could say justice. Where does this idea of freedom and liberty combined with law come about? So there's one theory, it's called the social contract theory. And what social contract theory is, it's a contract between two groups, two individuals. It's not necessarily a written contract. It could be one that is out in the stratosphere that we make with one another in order to make society work more harmoniously. And how this works is that one gives away some degree of their freedom willingly. So one is free to give up some of their freedom, and they do this in order to make society work in a more cohesive way. So one may give up their liberty for the sake of law, and because law and order make society work better, it's okay to give up some of that freedom. And related to the quote I stated earlier, there is no freedom without the law. So there could be some degree of freedom without the law. This is quite an absolutist statement. But essentially, one may have more freedom by giving up a bit of their freedom and submitting to the will of the common good or to a higher sort of entity like the government, for instance. The government acts as a third party to keep society working in a cohesive way. For example, by submitting to the law, we agree that we won't murder each other. Murder is illegal. So if murder was not illegal, if you didn't submit some of your freedom to a higher governing law, you might not be alive to experience any freedom in your life at all. So this is one sort of grand example of how the social contract theory works in action. So generally, people give up some degree of their own freedom, liberty, or power to another, and that third party helps to regulate society. There are 4 social contract theorists that influence the formation of the United States government. And these 4 theorists are Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. If we look at them in order here, they're sort of in a descending view of how democratic they think society should be. Hobbes and Locke, they were both okay with having a monarchy as a form of government. Locke, he did not want an absolutist sort of monarchy. He envisioned a weak king that was bound by a representative government, sort of like what we see in Great Britain. Montesquieu and Rousseau, they more so viewed society in a much more democratic way. And as for Hobbes, he had a quite interesting view on why people went into social contracts with each other. And his view was that people unrelentingly seek power, and society is born out of war. So people are always at conflict with each other, and in a way to make some form of peace, people come to social agreements to give up some degree of power so that they can be protected by a third-party entity. Locke, he is perhaps the most important social contract theorist for American government, and he influenced the writing of the Declaration of Independence and the writings in the Constitution. His view was that we have the natural right of life, liberty, and property, and that sounds strikingly familiar to what we hear in the Declaration of Independence, that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So Locke was perhaps the most influential. And take a moment here to read about Montesquieu and Rousseau. I stated their quotes in this slide. If you would like to pause the video to read them a second here. Social contract theory was born out of a movement called the Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason. The Enlightenment existed roughly in the 1700s, but we could say that it started in the 1600s and lasted till about 1800. This was a movement where many thinkers, such as Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu, they emphasized reason and logic in their thought processes. And what they were thinking about where they were applying this reason and logic was society and government. Primarily. They saw many issues with society at large. There were wars throughout Europe for many years, and they wanted to look at society in a much more reasonable way. And some of the conclusions they came up with and how they came to these conclusions were quite similar to the thinkers of ancient Greece, Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates. And that's not by accident, that's really by design in a way, you could say, because the Enlightenment was born out of this era of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, where people emphasized reason, the scientific method, and logic. The Renaissance, for example, this was an era after the Middle Ages when people became interested in ancient Greek and Latin texts, these Greek texts from Greece and Rome. And this caused people to start thinking about society and government in a different way again. For a long time during the so-called Dark Ages, people didn't think about these things because these books were essentially hidden in some dusty old corner in probably a monastery somewhere. And so people didn't really think about things in this way. But during the Renaissance, this was this revival of ancient Greek and Roman culture, and people looked at these texts again. I'd like to keep in mind here too, this is the same era though that we saw the witch trials in New England. Those were in 1692. So on one hand, we see the Enlightenment and people are starting to think and reason, and on the other hand, people are becoming fanatical and very illogical as well during the same time period. The Enlightenment had a dual movement that was occurring around the same time called the Great Awakening. And the Great Awakening was this movement of Protestant faiths becoming very enthusiastic about their religion, about Christianity. So there is this revival in Christianity at the same time, because we can imagine during the Enlightenment, with logic and reason and science, people were starting to pull away from Christianity, or they weren't as excited about it as they may have been in the past. So in America, we can see this Enlightenment movement, but let's also look at the Great Awakening, where at the same time, people were becoming revitalized in their Christian faith. And it's important to understand these two things happening at the same time, because both influence the United States political realm, even to this day. And as I stated here, the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening, we could say they were born out of the Reformation, more so the Great Awakening, because this was this reanalyzing of the Christian faith that started to occur following the Middle Ages. So having heard here now about the social contract, law, liberty, natural law, positive law, meaning man-made law, and the Enlightenment, the Declaration of Independence embodies all of these values in one cohesive sort of text. If we look here at this picture, this is Thomas Jefferson. He is the man who penned most of the Declaration of Independence, and he was influenced greatly by Enlightenment thinking and these social contract theorists such as Hobbes and Locke primarily. So in the Declaration of Independence, we see a great mixture of natural law, positive law, liberty, and democracy being born through the social contract. So let's read through this here. So when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So in this first part here, Jefferson is stating that the natural laws, rights, and privileges that are entitled to men all being equal, men meaning humanity, these were violated by the British government. And since the law of nature was violated by the British government, Jefferson and the other founders of the United States government are impelled to leave this government, because this government did not uphold the law of nature or of nature's God, meaning human nature as well. The next part here, perhaps the most important or well-known part of the Declaration of Independence, is we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So all humanity is equality. That is a great American political value as well. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So these rights endowed to us by our Creator, or even by the universe or nature or human nature itself, these are rights that we could consider natural law. These are our God-given rights, you could say. And those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Very similar to what Locke said were our rights, our natural rights, life, liberty, and property. But here it's the pursuit of happiness, because maybe not everybody wants to own property, but there are certain other things that we should have protected by some law. So in here, it's important to note too, it's law, it's natural law that grants us the right of liberty. So again, there is no liberty without the law. Natural law is what gives us liberty. If the law that we are born with and abide by did not grant us liberty, why would we be entitled to it? So this is the reason why we're entitled to this form of liberty and why liberty is dependent on law. This next part here, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So this last part here is the basis for a democratic government. Governments exist because of the consent of the governed. So to tie these three together, natural law entitles us to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and other things, that among these, so these and other things, and the people, though, through a social contract, they create a government to protect their natural law. So man-made law helps to protect natural law, the laws of nature. And through that, we have liberty and freedom. Again, there is no liberty without the law. There is no freedom without the law. And again, I'll restate here that liberty and law, these two things coming together, are what encompass American political values to a T. Equality, limited government, these also, but the two foremost values are liberty and law, liberty and justice. For all, hopefully, but liberty and law.